Okay, here's my friend Mike G. Tell me about the history of bubblegum music.
Well, I think, that goes back to is you could argue that bubblegum even started with Frank Sinatra and the Bobby Soxers, but as far as the bubblegum rock, I think it's fair to say that it started with the Beatles. I mean, that was really well, the type that we're talking about, yeah, the Beatles. I mean, you could go back to say Frankie Lyman and the Teenagers, stuff like that in the '50s, but for the contemporary bubblegum rock that I'm into, I would say it starts with the Beatles for sure. Now, here's the thing about what I'd like to talk about with bubblegum rock is the link between bubblegum and television. And that's a very important thing because that seems to be the way that bubblegum music found its way to an audience that it wouldn't ordinarily find because its audience was so young that they weren't necessarily allowed access to radios and record players and things like that. So television was really the best form of dissemination. And of course it made sense because you got a multimedia presentation that appealed to the young mind. You had video and audio, and that actually was very helpful. Although there were certainly many bubblegum groups in the 60s that, didn't really rely on film that much. There are some very funny promotional films of bands like 1910 Fruit Gum Company, where obviously somebody off stage said, "Smile, smile," and they all suddenly smiling, they just went from this dour like to hey, bubblegum, So anyway, it's funny. Some of those '60s bands were really those guys were kind of reluctant. Like I remember the Lemon Pipers, for example. Green Tambourine and Rice is Nice. They were interviewed on some show and they were doing like a video on a merry-go-round for their song Green Tambourine, and they were real bitter about it. They were like, guys come up, "Oh, so how does it feel to be, have your hit, Green Tambourine?" And the guy's like, "Great, can we get out of here?" And you can tell the guy is just like really, and he keeps like punching this little stuffed teddy bear that goes every time he goes around. And I don't know, it was kind of weird, but anyway. So yeah, but it's the whole thing was television. That really was the key to the true bubblegum music. And the Beatles don't want us to remember this, by the way, but the Beatles actually started it because they had a series of cartoons that aired on Saturday mornings in the early to mid '60s, produced by Al Brodax and the same people that did the Popeyes at the time. And the Beatles didn't like them because they were doing, the cartoons showed them doing things that weren't in character for them, like beating each other up and doing a lot of weird, silly things. But I happen to have a bootleg copy of all those DVDs that have all those, all three seasons of it. And yeah, I agree, they weren't great. The nice thing about them, though, was they had that follow the bouncing ball kind of thing that they used to have in the theaters. They would have like their songs, like, and it's funny because the cartoon showed a lot of their songs that were more deep tracks too, not a lot of their bigger hits. And it would show, like, have a follow the bouncing ball kind of thing. And it was pretty cool. But the Beatles didn't like them, and they deep sixed them. And you know how powerful the Beatles became. So if the Beatles didn't want something shown, they're gonna find a way to get rid of it. So the only way to find it is on bootleg. Like I said, I got mine from Brazil. But that's the beginning of it. Then you had, of course, the Monkees, which was, all that kind of weird kind of, a lot of hints about marijuana and other drugs.
Were they a real band?
I would say they were. I would actually say if they weren't, they should have been. That would be my answer. If they weren't, they became one. And they actually were fairly musically talented. At least two of them were. Peter Tork, who everybody thinks is some kind of walking scarecrow, he actually was a very intelligent guy and very very talented. He could actually play keyboards, banjo, guitar. Not the greatest singer in the world, but he was actually more talented than they let on. Mike Neesmith was also a talented guitar player and songwriter. And the other two just added some nice flavor, But Oh, by the way, did you know that Davy Jones and Mike Nesmith were born on the exact same day, 3 years apart? They're both Capricorns. Yeah, December 30th, I think.
And the album was titled...
Yeah, they capitalized on that because the band had 2 Capricorns, an Aquarius, and a Pisces. So they named the band Capricorn, Aquarius, Pisces, and Jones. Mickey Dolenz was the Pisces, and Peter Tork was the Aquarius. And of course, you remember that Mickey Dolenz had a career as a child actor and circus boy, but he didn't go under his name. He went under a different name because he didn't want to be confused with his father, who was also named Dolenz, who was also an actor. But for whatever reason, and when the Monkees rolled around, I guess he decided to use his real name, maybe to distance himself from Circus Boy. I don't know, but Circus Boy is hysterical. If you're up at like 5:30 in the morning, maybe you can catch an episode of it.
Were the Archies a real band?
No, they weren't. And the Archies were a direct result of what happened with the Monkees. There's a famous anecdote about how Mike Nesmith threatened Don Kirshner, who was behind the creation of the Monkees. And, they both of them tell very different versions of the story, but, Don Kirshner's version is, hey, I made you guys rich. Here, I'm going to hand each of you a check for $1 million and you want to punch me in the face? I mean, there was a famous, what they didn't like was that the Monkees started to have this thing that they really were a band. And that Don Kirshner and Coal Gems had put out a second album that they didn't even know about while they were on tour for the first, called More of the Monkees. It was that avocado green one, when love comes knocking at your door. Anyway, and Mike Nesmith punched a hole in the wall and says to Don Kirshner, that could have been your face, Emmer Effer. So, they have some very disparate views, but apparently that whole experience left a very bad taste in Don Kirshner's mouth. So he decided to create a band that was not a real band that you could easily manage. But what's interesting is, and I met Ron Dante, by the way. Ron Dante was the lead singer of a band called the Cufflinks, but he was recruited, and it's funny, the timing was interesting because the Cufflinks just had a big hit with Tracy. At that very same time, he was being recruited to be the lead vocalist, and I think played some guitar on the Archies tracks. And Sugar Sugar, of course, just went, way overblew anything that the Cufflinks were doing. So Ron Dante left the Cufflinks high and dry. They put out another album without him, which just went El Floppo, and which is a shame because it wasn't a terrible album. It just wasn't a good album. And then they carried on. But what eventually happened is Ron Dante and some of the people he was working with, like Andy Kim and some of the other people involved, they started to think that they were a real band, just like in the Monkees. And and they started demanding more creative control in the studio. And if you have listened to the Archies albums, I think they have 5 studio albums. Towards the 4th or 5th album, you notice that the material starts to get more socially conscious. It starts to get more, more.
Stop the war.
Yeah, don't pollute. Hey, Mr. Factory, where will the kids play? That kind of thing. And it was always, they were always tugging at the heartstrings of the little kids. They were always indoctrinating, the kids as young as they could get into that thing. They're trying to get them to be environmentally conscious and look at those mean adults you're doing to your world, kids. You need to become environmental warriors, and you need to fight against racism, and you need to fight against, which is these are not bad sentiments, but the recruitment was so obvious. You know what I mean? It's just, so.
And what about the Bugaloos?
Oh,
who were they?
Oh, well, now, see, here's the whole thing I was going to say about all of this was Bubblegum was the music that got me into music. And the first band I was ever into was the Bugaloos. And that was Sid and Marty Krofft. That was their first thing, even before H.R. Puffin stuff, as a matter of fact. And those guys were 2 crazy Jews that smoked a lot of dope, but wouldn't admit it, and put a little references to things in there, just like the Monkees did. They thought that they might capitalize on the success of the Beatles. So so Bugaloos was a play on that, the insect bands from England, so the Crickets, and well, of course that was an American band, but because the Beatles named themselves after Buddy Holly and the Crickets. And then, interesting enough, that band, the Hollies, also took their name from Buddy Holly and the Crickets too.
Did the Bugaloos have a genuine hit record?
The Bugaloos.
Bugaloos, sorry.
Yeah, thank you. They had one or two. They could have had a hit with something like "The Colors of Your Mind," I think it was called, and that was the one where the girl sang lead. Beautiful song, and it really should have been a bigger hit than it was. They had Billy Barty was in that band, by the way. He was not in the band, but he was in the show. But he actually kind of was in the band because there's one song that supposedly he sings lead on as this little Sparky the Firefly that has a sort of short-circuiting tail feather. It was called the Nya Nya song. It went Nya 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 Nya. I'm sorry, I know it's obnoxious, but that's how it went. And that was supposedly Billy Barty singing that. And an interesting thing, Billy Barty did the commencement speech at my graduation from Cal State LA.
Full circle.
I know.
Now, what about the Partridge Family?
Oh, well, I mean, come on. After the Bugaloos, of course, Friday, I believe it was Friday nights on ABC. That belonged to the kids. I mean, that was our territory.
Brady Bunch.
Brady Bunch, Nanny and the Professor, the Partridge Family.
Room 222.
Yeah, that was, I think,
Odd Couple.
I forget, but anyway, yeah, I went in for all that stuff. Brady Bunch, not so much, although I did like it when they sang. But yeah, and I was a big fan of Nanny and the Professor, huge fan of that.
Which only ran 2 years.
I know.
And disappeared like a magic trick.
True. But the Partridge Family, I was all over it, and I remembered fantasizing that I could turn my parents into the Partridge Family and dress them up in white flare pants with red and blue stripes on them, and and have a little jam in our living room, but that just, of course, never happened because my parents were my dad especially, was very anti-music. And when I told my father about my interest in all of these, bubblegum rock bands and all this stuff, he turned around very sternly and he said, "Mike, don't be in such a hurry to grow up." It's like, oh, what? So I could just lie in bed all day and smoke cigarettes like you? Yeah, okay, that's a great future to look forward to.
So I Think I Love You, is that a Bubblegum song?
Yeah, I would say so. That's fair.
Really?
Yeah. Well, I mean, Bubblegum, there are no hard delineations in rock and roll. I mean, Bubblegum bordered on areas like there was techno bubblegum, like there was, that band Hot Butter did Popcorn, which was actually a redo of Gershon Kingsley's hit. I like Gershon Kingsley's version better, frankly, but there was a techno side to it, and there was a psychedelic side, like you had, the Lemon Pipers were more psychedelic. There was just a straight ahead pop. I mean, more, there was even a little blues kind of thing going on. So bubblegum kind of, and teen idol music, it's sort of a Venn diagram of these things all coming together. But you definitely knew that something was bubblegum, though. There was a definite branding of bubblegum from I would say from 1966 to today even. I mean, even today there's remnants of it. Miley Cyrus in Hannah Montana, that's bubblegum. I don't care what anybody says, it's bubblegum. It's updated bubblegum, but it's bubblegum. And yeah, well, right?
Yeah.
And things like that. So Disney Channel has availed themselves of that, but they've done it in kind of a self-conscious retro kind of way. You know what I mean? So
early 70s, what were the best bubblegum songs that you loved, you remember?
Well, Partridge Family, I Think I Love You is a good candidate. I would say that some Three Dog Night songs could have fallen into that category.
Joy to the World?
Yeah, definitely. Although they weren't a bubblegum band per se, but they definitely knew what was going on at the time, and they definitely had shrewd marketing. I met one of those guys too, by the way. He's a cool guy. I would say that, well, I thought Hot Butter was, I wouldn't call that bubblegum exactly, but.
What was that? Yummy, yummy.
Oh, well, yeah, that was Mark Levine, not Mark Levine. Was that his name? I forget his name, but Mark Levine. Joey Levine, excuse me.
Yummy in my tummy?
Yeah, yummy, 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 I got love in my tummy. And I met him too. I met him at the second annual Bubblegum Music Awards. That was, I think the band that did that was Ohio Express. Yeah, and that was one of the names. He fronted several bands, but I think one of the most underrated Bubblegum songs is a band that he sang on. He sang lead vocals for too, but it wasn't the Ohio Express. They had another name, and I forgot what it was, but it was that song "Life Is a Rock," but the radio rolled me, and that's rap. That's actually rap. I mean, the way he rattles all that stuff out, and Tracy Ullman, who shouldn't be overlooked completely in the sphere of bubblegum, covered that on one of her albums, and she did a very good job of it.
So final question, are the Jacksons and Osmonds, are they bubblegum?
Absolutely.
They are.
Absolutely.
Huh.
And here's why. Because they used, their target market was, young kids. They used television. They both had their own animated TV shows. The Jacksons apparently couldn't be bothered to do the voices in theirs. The Osmonds did. The Osmonds did all their voices in that cartoon and the songs. And I'm not slighting on the Jacksons. It's just that for whatever reason, someone made that decision. But yeah, I would say the Jackson 5 were definitely bubblegum. Absolutely. And here's the thing that a lot of people don't know. The Archies had a black member too. The woman that's supposedly singing, I guess, Betty or Veronica's voice, "I'm gonna make your life so sweet." She was a black woman, and her name is, I think, something Childs, Betty Childs or something like that. And I met her too, and unfortunately I don't remember her name. I was going to look it up before we did this. But I met her too. I met her the same night I met Ron Dante at the second annual Bubblegum Music Awards. And we talked for quite a while. And I told her I was a huge fan, and I am.
Well, okay, one more question. Are these cartoons long gone? Because I don't recall them. You can find them?
No, they are. You can get them. I recently bought the entire series of Sabrina the Teenage Witch on DVD at like Target or something. Target had the Jackson 5 cartoon. No, they're out there. As a matter of fact, the people who packaged the DVD, and I got the Bugaloos on a bootleg Blu-ray. I will admit that. But it has the whole series on it, and the songs sound good.
Thank you.
It's out there.
All right. Thanks a lot, Mike.